Taking responsibility takes all the joy out of life and drains a man to dust. Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm carrying on my reviews of the Wheel of Time series, and we're now on book 4, which to me is one of the best books of the series, so I can't wait to talk about it. In The Shadow Rising, we follow our protagonists as they take us to some of the far reaches of Jordan's world. We follow Rand, Mat and Egwene as they journey to the Isle Waste to meet the Aiel, a mysterious warrior race all but unknown to the wider world until this point. Meanwhile, Perrin returns to his homeland, the Two Rivers, to defend it against those that would destroy it, while Nynaeve and Elaine hunt the Black Arger in Tanchico. Part 1. Epic World Building. A lot of people who I've seen review The Shadow Rising describe it as being one of the quintessential Wheel of Time novels, and I think one of the main reasons for that is to do with the world building on display in this book. It's definitely the novel where Jordan really flexes his world building muscles in a way that he hasn't up until this point. It's also the novel, I think, where he starts really moving away more than ever before, away from the classical fantasy Tolkien-esque inspired stuff that we saw in the first 3 novels, especially the first one. So we've got Rand, Mat and Egwene all going to the Aiel Waste, we have Nynaeve and Elaine in Tanchico, and we have Perrin back in the Two Rivers saving it from invasion. We'll talk about Perrin in a bit because there's not much new world building in terms of going back to the Two Rivers, so let's talk about the Aiel and also Nynaeve and Elaine's plots as well. So first of all, we've got Rand with the Aiel, and this is where the world building in this book really shines. The Aiel are just a fantastic creation, and one of my favourites of the series. I really like learning more and more about their culture as we go. The Aiel are a tribal people that are split into subtly different clans, but all of these clans have an overarching code of ethics that keeps them and binds them together. Jordan does a really good job of showing the differences between these clans. He also does a really good job of capturing the culture clash that's going on with the Aiel and the non-Aiel characters like Rand, Mat and Egwene. There are so many misunderstandings of culture and ways of doing things in this book, and there are so many culture clashes. It's great. It adds nuance, makes for interesting relationships because you have people from very different backgrounds now meeting each other for the first time, rather than people who are up until this point more or less similar. Even though they're from different places, people like Elaine, Rand, Mat, they're all roughly the same, even if they have a little bit difference in backgrounds. It's with the Aiel that we really start getting those strong culture clash plot lines, which is one of the things that Jordan does really well. We also get with the Aiel a fantastic mystery surrounding the history of the people, and this culminates in one of the best parts of the book where Rand goes to an ancient place and he has visions that reveals to him the Aiel past, which I won't spoil, but that scene is just really good. It's another dream sequence, a bit like Egwene and Nynaeve's dream sequences when they go through the mirrors in the Aes Sedai when they're training to become accepted. But yeah, it's really good, it's very dramatic, and again, really interesting world building, a really interesting race. In addition to the Aiel, we also get a look at the Tanchico people, who again they're not as well done as the Aiel in terms of depth, because the Aiel take up more time, but again, you do see when Nynaeve and Elaine go to Tanchico, a very clear difference between these people and people from other places that we've been to before. But the main thing that I want to talk about here is not the Tanchico people, but the return of the Seanchan. In particular, I want to talk about Egianan, who is a Seanchan captain, who comes into contact with Nynaeve and Elaine. The first time the Seanchan were introduced was in book 2, and while a very interesting race for sure, they were pretty much played in that book as straight villains. They tortured Egwene by putting the Adam on her neck. They were kind of just horrible, kind of just villains. But in this book, Jordan does a bit of a flip with the character of Egianan, who becomes friends with Nynaeve and Elaine, albeit after a little bit of trouble. This is a fantastic move, because what it does is it allows Jordan to make a race that seems pretty one-dimensional villain type into something more nuanced and more interesting. You're able to empathise with someone who 2 books ago you would have just hated and seen as a villain. And that's such a good move, and it just makes, again, even if we're not learning anything new about Seanchan culture so much here, we're getting a sense that this is a 3-dimensional race of people. They're not just evil because they enslave Aes Sedai, they also have nuance, they have desires, they have loves, and all these things. So it's a really good move to bring that in, and it adds nuance to the world that Jordan's created. One thing that I really like about the Wheel of Time is that even though the story itself, the overarching plot, is essentially a good versus evil type thing, it's light versus dark, the people in the story are not just light or dark. Every character, every race has good elements to it and bad elements to it, and The story is essentially about balancing these various elements most of the time. It's really in the world building where the complexity and the nuance comes about. So even if the overarching plot, some people might think, oh, it's just good versus evil, just look at the characters, look at the races, and look at the world, because it's so complex, it's so grey and interesting, and in this book, this stuff just really shines. Part 2. The weaving of plots. So one of the things about fantasy novels, especially when those fantasy novels have multiple perspectives, is that as a reader, sometimes you're reading along and there's one character or two characters and you're just not interested in their perspectives, you kind of want to skip the chapters, and that can make for a pretty bad reading experience. In fact, I'm currently rereading Game of Thrones at the minute, and I do find there are a couple of characters like Sam, I hate his chapters, and I always want to skip them. And it does ruin the reading experience if you get in that kind of block, because you want to stop. This is also a problem with The Wheel of Time, as we'll come to see in future books. But I think in The Shadow Rising, we have a book where all of the characters have interesting things going on, and all of the plots are really engaging and really well executed. Even though there might be some plots that might be a little bit of the same, I'm thinking here of Elaine and Nynaeve, again hunting Black Aja, Jordan actually does more interesting things with them. First of all, they're in a different place, they're in Tanchico, which is interesting. They have the relationship with Egianan going on. They also have Tom and Julian with them. And the way that that plot resolves itself this time is way more interesting than just they end up finding themselves back with Rand. You get the introduction of one of the Forsaken and a battle between her and Nynaeve, which is just a stellar moment in the series, and again, really cathartic and just, really good. In terms of the characters in the Isle Waste, Matt doesn't get all that much in this book. He has a little bit going on at the beginning with some interesting stuff. The focus in the Isle Waste is more on Rand and Egwene. Rand as he is trying to win the loyalty of the Aiel and get them to follow him, and Egwene as she is learning to control her dreaming powers with the Wise Ones, who are the Aes Sedai equivalent, if you like, of the Aiel people. My favourite plot though in this book is Perrin's plot in the Two Rivers. Perrin is one of my favourite characters, even though in later books he gets a bit sidelined. I do think early series Perrin is just the best, and his plot in the Two Rivers is probably his best moment in the series for me overall. His story is a little bit similar to Rand's in that he is being forced more and more into a leadership role, and he's seeing people who he used to look up to now deferring to him, and he has to deal with that. He also has some interesting relationship moments with Fael, who, even though I'm actually finding I'm liking her a bit more this time around, and I am finding their relationship to be much more interesting than I did before as well. Just in this book, they actually mature quite a lot, and while they've still got a lot to do in terms of maturing in their relationship, I actually quite like the way their relationship is evolving this time around. It's interesting, there's odd dynamics between them, and it's one of the more interesting relationships in the series, and probably one of the more organic. It doesn't feel too forced, which there are many relationships in the Wheel of Time that can be described as forced, but this definitely isn't one of them. Final thing to talk about in terms of plots is that finally we have a book where the characters don't come together at the end, and there's no just one big boss fight and Rand wins and all that kind of stuff is gone. Instead, the characters stay where they are, their plots resolve individually, and they resolve really well, and that to me is a great advancement over the first three books, where the endings were always very similar. So, not only do we have three great main plots in this book, and some interesting side plots that I don't have time to talk about, we also have a very satisfying conclusion to those plots. So great stuff. Part 3. Growth and maturity. So the reason I decided to open this video with that quote from the book about responsibility was because I think it pretty much sums up the main theme of this book. In The Shadow Rising, all of the characters are now progressing away from being children and seeing themselves in roles of authority in a way that they haven't up until this point. This is mostly true of Rand and Perrin, who both start to take on leadership roles, and they see people like Tam or Moraine, who were the guiding adult forces, taking a back seat to them and deferring to them. These two characters also mirror each other quite nicely, because we have Rand, who is taking a more active role in becoming a leader. He's trying to step up even if he is terrified inside and has lots of angst going on there. Whereas Perrin is much more reluctant in his role. He doesn't want to be a lord, he doesn't want to be in control, he just wants to kind of hide away and be a blacksmith again. And I like that mirror, I like that the story has that different take on a very similar rite of passage, growing up and taking responsibility. I think there's also a bit of mirroring going on between Nynaeve and Egwene, although it's slightly different from how it's working with Rand and Perrin. Both of the women are very headstrong and proud, and they want to throw themselves in and do all the dangerous stuff in terms of using the power, Egwene using Dreamworld in particular, and Nynaeve taking on one of the Forsaken. And both of them have to learn in this book to be more responsible, to control their powers and not to just throw themselves into dangerous situations when they don't know what they're doing. This is especially true of Nynaeve, with the wise ones who punish her for breaking their rules when they find out. Lastly, also we need to talk about Mat, because the quote that I started the video with is from him. Now, Mat does not take on a leadership role in this book, but he does still go through a similar thing to the other characters. He does recognise, as a Targaryen, that he is going to have to at some point take responsibility and step up, but at this point he is still running away, he's still hiding in the shadows, he doesn't want to take on that responsibility, even though he knows deep down that it is going to be forced on him at some point. So even though he doesn't quite take on the leadership role in the way some of the other characters do, he's still reacting to a very similar thing. And I like that about this book, because all of the characters have very similar things going on with them, but they're all reacting to it very differently, and they are in a different context, which again adds nuance and subtlety to this theme. Although the characters don't fully mature in this book, I do think this is the book where that maturity does really begin, and they really do start to grow up and move away from being just children who are scared and confused. They're starting to take on more adult roles, and the adult characters are starting to take on a more backseat role. And you can see that going forward, definitely in the future books, where that presence continues. The younger ones kind of start to become their active forces, rather than the passive ones, listening to the adults. Part 5, Conclusion. So I think The Shadow Rising, in terms of my reread, is probably my favourite novel so far, but I don't want to say that it's the best one, because I want to wait till I've read them all again, and then I can work out if that's the case. But it was my favourite last time, so it might still hold that title this time, but we'll see how we go with the future books. The things that I like about it, as I've said, the plots especially, they're all fantastic, they weave quite well together, they reflect each other in interesting ways, and they all have really good resolutions and some of the most standout moments of the series. You've also got great character development going on through these plots, and fantastic world building as well. Alright, that's it for today's video. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and consider subscribing to my channel to get updates for new content. Also, let me know in the comments, what is your favourite Wheel of Time book? I will probably do a ranking video when I have finished the series, so it'd be interesting to start getting your opinions on what you think the best book is. Also, feel free to mention anything else about The Shadow Rising, Wheel of Time, or any books that you'd like me to read in the future. Take care everyone, and I'll see you all in the next video.